This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Wake up, Alphas! Today we're joined by Dr. Tina M. Burke, who is the Associate Director of the Behavioral Biology Branch and a sleep research scientist at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. And we're going to talk with her about how sleep impacts wellness and readiness. There won't be any dozing off during this episode, but before we dive in, Stacy, what do you got for us?
Well, March 11th is National Debunking Day, and a day this helps us gain a little bit more clarity to some things like myths and falsities, things that we hear in the news, things that we hear every day.
Is it really National Debunking Day, though?
We could debunk it.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I trust nothing.
True or false? Does Sasquatch really exist? Are UFOs real? Holly, our super producer, would have you think that that Bigfoot is real
and drives a UFO.
Adam, do you think you're a helicopter pilot? Have you ever seen a UFO?
Do we got a tracker up on how many of these have not been debunked because they're real conspiracies? They're not constant conspiracies.
Take your metal helmet off, please.
These things are getting proven left and right, my friends. I listen to Joe Rogan. I know these things.
Lord. Well, before we get too much in the weeds, I've got a scuttlebutt all about National Debunking Day. So stay tuned for that.
All right, Alphas, do me a favor. Can you do this? I've asked you for one thing. Just stick around. We'll be back with our guest right after the break, who is Dr. Tina Burke, Associate Director of the Behavioral Biology Branch and a sleep research scientist at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. And now you know.
A new year is always a good time to make new connections. It can also serve as a reminder of the importance of maintaining our existing connections with family and friends. However, any kind of connection can be particularly challenging for veterans with hearing loss who have difficulty using the phone. That's why the Heroes with Hearing Loss program, provided by Hamilton Captel, is here for you. The Heroes with Hearing Loss program offers veterans solutions like captioned telephone, which allows you to listen and read everything said during a phone call, making it easier than ever to stay connected with the people who matter most. Captioned telephones are available at no cost for veterans with hearing loss. Don't let hearing loss prevent you from connecting with others this year. For more information, including eligibility requirements, visit heroeswithhearingloss.org now. And stay connected.
Hey Alphas, today we are joined by Dr. Tina Burke, Associate Director of the Behavioral Biology Branch and a sleep research scientist at Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, occasional skedaddler, and wearer of cool yellow glasses. Welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
Thanks for a wonderful welcome.
Of course.
Hey, Dr. Burke, it's a pleasure to have you join us. And in preparation for this show, actually, it's not in preparation. It's an absolute coincidence. I had my first sleep consultation last week, and I'm actually have a 9:15 p.m. showtime for my first phase of my sleep study tonight. So I could not have, I couldn't have planned it. I'm excited to learn from you today as I'm trying to unpack the things that are happening when I sleep and how I may be able to do it better. And so certainly looking forward to hearing that from you today. But your journey into sleep research is quite fascinating. So what was it that sparked your interest into understanding sleep and circadian rhythms, and how did that lead you into military-focused research that you do now?
Yeah, it's a quite interesting journey. I feel like as most people, similar to kind of what you're demonstrating right now, is everybody sleeps. Even most species all have some form of sleep or posturing that is sleep-like. And so it makes it easier for my job sometimes to actually be able to connect and communicate with people, because Just like everybody poops, everybody sleeps, or sometimes they have a different relationship with sleep. I shouldn't always.
Sometimes at the same time.
I know, poop and sleeping together, the dynamic combo. And so it's interesting for me when I was in high school. I definitely liked this idea of consciousness, and I loved dreaming. I loved what I saw in my dreams, what I felt like I had the power over in my dreams, and just the creativity of it. And I didn't really know how that was a career or anything like that. And I started my kind of scholastic journey not really knowing what I wanted to do, as I'm sure most new college students do. And I kind of started with a pre-med degree, a psychology degree, and a biology degree as my major focuses. Psychology won out with more kind of the minors and the med and biology side, but I still really loved how that was connected. And I had an opportunity at Kent State University to really engage in research. And so I looked at research in animals with immunology and learning, and then in humans as well with how humans learn, and then some stress research and how people respond to stressful situations. And one of the things that I found very passionate was really thinking about how learning at a collegiate level or more in-depth information was linked, but I still always loved sleep. And so when I finished my degree for my bachelor's, I was really talking to one of my mentors who was in learning, and I was like, hey, I really want to link what we're doing with how college students learn to then how do we link that with their sleep? Because I really think, I know for me, sleep is important for my learning. And I don't see a lot of research in this particular area of learning for more complex ideas with sleep. And it just happened that my advisor at the time, her name is Catherine Rawson, she's like, oh, I went to the school for graduate school at the University of Colorado Boulder. There's this guy there that I know. His name's Ken Wright, and I think he's doing what you want. And I went out to Colorado and instantly fell in love with probably the community first, because the environment is absolutely fantastic, and I am definitely a very huggy person. I love stranger hugs. I don't know if you can get those vibes from me, but man, that was the place that I wanted to be.
A lot of hugs out there in Colorado.
I know, love it. And
might be the ones where Georgia went. We used to do it a lot down here, but we don't anymore.
It's a very southern thing for sure.
Migrated.
I'm also from Ohio, so I guess I also have the Midwest hug as well. So it's just transitioning to the different types of hugs. I feel like I've brought more hugging to the East Coast. That's also one of my
nice. It's a good import.
And so when I then met Kenneth Wright, he was so passionate about just teaching. So as a mentor, I always tease him because I was like, man, you have served the best Kool-Aid I have ever drank. Because literally his passion for research, and specifically sleep research, and something that at that time had no idea what circadian or internal biological time was. And he just made it sound like it was the sexiest thing. And if you didn't want to do research on it, it's like, man, you got to get with the times. So it's a nice circadian pun for you guys too. And I literally, through just that experience kind of with him and really learning from someone, even wanting to kind of do learning research, put me on this different path and trajectory to learn different intricacies about sleep that I didn't know. And it just happened as I kind of progressed throughout my career. I really, my husband at the time, he had been a professional cyclist, and we were kind of staying in the area for him to finish his career, and he finally retired, and I was like, all right, my turn again. And so I got in contact with a lot of my friends in the community, and a lot of my friends had kind of gone on military paths that I had gone to graduate school with. So a couple of them kind of went to the Navy side of the house. And I happened to have a friend who had been enlisted, and I was like, hey, I really want to learn about neuroimaging and how I can bring like the circadian system to the military, because I haven't really heard about that. Are you aware of any positions? And she literally was like, I have a job right now for you. Can you come from Colorado in 2 weeks? And the job is yours. And that was history of just an amazing happenstance of connecting with my friends. So you moved from
Colorado?
I did.
And where are you now?
I am in Silver Spring, Maryland, is where Rare is located. So I had the privilege of having the flexibility to just kind of get up and move. And it's been one of the best decisions of my life. And it's so interesting as well, like our community, like I feel like we've also, because we have so many of the same sleep people, and in the community, we've also helped to bring tri-service efforts for the military as well together.
Well, how do you feel now that you're an expert?
That it's so interesting. I would say I know more than most, but I always know that there's always more to learn. So I always like to dance that line, because it's interesting. Every person has such a unique story, and there's a lot of things that we can provide. And then sometimes everything can be tailored to kind of the unique individual as well. So I always would say, like, I might be considered an expert, but there's always an opportunity to learn more.
Well, so I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today, because sleep has been a long time struggle for me. I'm Stacy, by the way. Nice to meet you, Dr. Burke. It's been about 20 years that I was, maybe even more than that now. Yeah, more than that I was hit by my first roadside bomb and had my first TBI. But since then, over the course of many years, that's when my sleep struggles really began, and have developed lesions because of TBI. And of course, the side effects of post-traumatic stress, like so many other combat veterans, the side effects of PTSD impact sleep, behavioral sleep disorders, things like that. For me, a lot in the initial days of still being deployed and in the years ensuing after my combat deployments, my major problem was, it wasn't that I hadn't had behavioral conditioning around sleeping that I had tried to readdress in those times. It was like, well, in combat, you can't really get around staying up around the clock. It's just how your body gets conditioned to doing it. Adrenaline spikes and you just can't sleep. And that is something that I couldn't overcome in the years after combat. And the initial way to overcome that was pharmaceuticals and using things like Ambien. And in the long term, that was what wasn't going to be the solution. So they transitioned to melatonin, which was like, not going to work for me. And so it just became a real problem. And it was funny because I was in my research looking over a lot of the articles and things that you had developed, and you have these wonderful PDFs and things. And ironically, I came up with this sort of self-meditation thing where I visualized this rock that I held in my hand, and it was a 3-sided rock, flat on eye sides, and it had this ridge, and I could visualize each and every ridge, and I could feel its heft and how cool it was. And anyway, it wouldn't let me go back to sleep because I had so much adrenaline constantly spiking through my system, but it did help me, focus on my breathing and reorient myself. And anyway, I guess it's like meditation, and you talk about meditation, you talk about breathing. And for so many of us folks who deal with insomnia, that's a big part or one of the practices you mentioned. So I've dealt with this for 20-ish years. Sleep struggles are a problem, and I'm tired, pun intended. But this is common for veterans like myself. What are some of the things that you recommend for alphas like me who are struggling, and maybe an ongoing struggle for decades? What do you got? Help us, Doc.
Well,
save her.
I very much empathize with your struggle, and it's interesting because each person is unique, but there oftentimes can be very common threads, especially I would presume in the alpha community we see a lot in veterans populations, and even folks who are just in the military community, or a lot of the support staff as well. Because like you were saying, similar to first responders, a lot of our medical providers, part of your job is the sleep loss. And there's parts that are unavoidable, and there are stressful things with it. And sometimes we don't always take into account the grace of the training that type of environment provides, let alone kind of your discussions of the things like traumatic brain injury that can, in and of itself, just impact your sleep from a biological perspective. So even our folks like who might be our football players or soccer players who have been having things like the ball hit their head or collisions can then have a greater prevalence of insomnia even later, just because of that. And if you look at a lot of our veterans and even some folks in our service members who have had these experiences, it's kind of like adding these factors or conditions that can contribute as well in an additive way to what might be linking to sleep problems. And of course, when you try to figure out what might be causing issues with sleep, it can kind of be dependent on really what the issues in the root causes. Because sometimes if it is something like you're talking about a traumatic brain injury, there's some actual physiology in terms of there's damage, and sometimes you can see different neural circuitry that can impact how and why you sleep. But even without that, a lot of what you describe are common things that we tend to hear in folks that I know tend to report feelings of kind of stress around their sleep loss. And sometimes we can see that more in folks who report insomnia. There are different things that are traditionally from a medical side of the house recommended. Sometimes you can use pharmaceuticals like you described. And then there can also be different interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy, trying to change those signalings. And then there can sometimes be these other interventional solutions like you're talking about, tactical breathing or meditation, in addition to just trying to get your body a different rhythm or routine. It's interesting because sometimes I get to go and collect saliva from our service members, and I'm like, I need you to spit in this tube. And they're like, I don't have saliva. I can't do it for you, Dr. Burke. And one of the things that I do is I have them do a visual exercise of just kind of closing your eyes, and we visualize a very yellow lemon. We cut that lemon in half, and then we quarter it. And then when you bite on it, you then salivate because of this visual imagery. And it's kind of like this old school Pavlov's dog. I give you a cue and you react to it. And you use that as a great example of how me as just this external person to you can elicit a physiological response because of a behavior that you've become predicted to have when presented with a specific cue. And we tend to try to recommend as well, when you're having issues with insomnia or sleeping, trying to get a ritualized routine in order to try to do the same thing. So if you can get a routine that can start serving for your body as a cue to start transitioning to bedtime, then you can try to help elicit that same type of physiological response. So decreasing things like your stress hormone activation, things like cortisol, and like how you're talking about the adrenaline surge, to try and dampen that down. And then it's interesting when we think of meditation and tactical breathing, it really is a physiological process. So when we engage in a lot of those breathing techniques, it activates a part of our autonomic nervous system called the parasympathetic portion of your autonomic nervous system, which is like the rest and digest piece. And so when you start engaging in those breathing techniques, it actually starts kind of forcing that system online. So removing from the like run the fight or flight response to try and activate that system, which helps bring down heart rate, helps decrease that stress response. But you also have to have patience that takes a little time to transition. And sometimes when we talk about those routine and those tactics, sometimes we don't give ourselves enough time to kind of have that transition and give ourselves solid cues. Because it's interesting, sometimes I'll talk to folks. I even just talk to someone in my lab who's one of our research assistants, and he's like, "Oh, Dr. Burke, I'm starting to like change the backlight on my screen so it's less blue." And then right next to his screen was a giant can that was a Monster can with lots of caffeine in it. And I was just like, I am glad that you're trying to use techniques that you're learning, but that caffeine, which 6 hours before bed can impact your sleep, that might make that process or the cues that you're trying to do with your lighting not work as well as you might intend. So sometimes when folks are like, "Oh, that's not quite right for me," I'm like, "Oh, there may also be just like other things in your routine
like
that you might not like." Monsters.
Monsters
it's interesting.
keep me awake at night too.
That is so. I'm gonna steal that for later. That's a great joke.
It's yours.
I know. Yours. Sorry,
I forget my jokes as soon as I say them. So.
I know. No copyright on that one.
You forget them because they're not funny, Joe, most of the time.
I remember all those insults, though. I write them down, and I read them out loud to myself.
In your back pocket, my friend.
But of course, there are these things that sometimes we might not recognize, and so it's more trying to also provide an education to say, like, you're doing great on this, but you might not notice it. Like another great common example. Because nighttime awakenings happen very, very frequently, and our bodies are actually designed to kind of rotate in and out of these kind of cycles. But a lot of times we're not consciously aware. And some of my folks who might wake up and have to go to the bathroom or something like that, they go into the bathroom, and I don't know if it's all bathrooms or if it's just mine. Like the lights that are in the bathroom are the brightest lights on the planet, so you can see like the microscopic view of your face, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I get up and go to the bathroom, I lay back down, I can't go to sleep." But I was like, "It's because you just," I was like, "because you shined a giant light in your eyes." And I'm like, "I'm so sorry, it's taking you a long time to go to sleep."
You're like washing your hands, trying not to make eye contact with yourself, like you're walking to a grocery store or something.
I just use a nightlight. Like I don't have a light switch I turn on anymore. I just have a nightlight.
I love it. Write that down, and we will start reminding people. But those are the things, like the first approach that I always talk about is like, let's go through what your routine is. And then just from practice, I know I get used to being like, what is your kitchen light situation looking like at like 9 o'clock at night? Like what are those things? But again, like you talking about your visual imagery, because a lot of folks who might have more intrusive thoughts, especially if they like wait till the end of the night, that's the first time you actually have quiet time to be with your own internal thoughts. Mm-hmm. To try to help distract yourself from those intrusive thoughts, one, you can kind of write them down or try to get them out of your body. But exactly what you're saying is a tactic that we teach, which is to use visual imagery while also doing a breathing technique in order to try and engage more of those processes to focus on that one thing to make the breathing or meditation more effective. So you doing that, like self-starting that is amazing. And I'm glad it's working because it should work. But again, like sometimes people don't know those things or haven't been presented with that as an option. So I'm so glad that you kind of came across that yourself.
And learn not to look at the version of you stuck in the mirror dimension in the middle of the night.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to do what you were as a kid. Stare at yourself in the dark and say Bloody Mary 3 times. You don't want to do that. Not a night.
So on my end, I just want to, first of all, say thank you so much for talking with us. And I just was recently invited to do a sleep improvement program with the Simplify in America's Fund.
Okay.
And I'm really looking forward to that. They've done some cool stuff, and my sleep is generally good for a one-legged guy who lost a leg in war. I feel like it's not bad. But I don't want to wait until I'm in crisis mode before learning about it.
Yeah.
And so for me, your baseline your bottom should not be something that you let yourself get close to when you have control over it, because you're not always going to have that.
Yeah.
So while my sleep is good, I'm trying to learn a little bit more. And they sent me this little packet with now I could never wear the thing that covers my eyes, because in my mind, as soon as I put that thing on, somebody's going to break in the house or something, and it's just going to be one more. But I say that because they've also got a thing to help track sleep. There's even the Pokemon Go has a thing that tracks your sleep.
Yeah.
My daughter was talking about it. Is it'll help you hatch the eggs or something. But my point is, technology is increasingly intertwined with our sleep. I mean, almost everybody, even if you read a book, generally you're doing it on your phone as you go to sleep. It's real. It's, then you get, your buddy Delvin sends you something on Instagram, and the next thing you know, you're scrolling through. So how do we leverage technology in a positive way to improve our sleep? Or what are some potential pitfalls that we should be aware of? And how can we use some of this technology for good instead of distractions? Because I think we're at a point now where it's hard to just tell someone, now take your phone and plug it in across the room, because no one is realistically going to do that, even though they should. I agree 100%.
I mean, there's the small wins. I'd love to be myself as a big beefy person that I could just lift 200 pounds. I know that's not true, and I probably couldn't lift 100 pounds, but I could start at 15 and start small steps and gain more strength. And your sleep and changes with that is no different. And when I think of technology, because I agree, especially with how we use technology right now, it's not always easy for me to be no electronics in the room, even though I also love to say that. I also try and think of what are the quick wins. And I'm hey, if your phone is with you, there's night shift mode, and you can change the color of the background lighting. Because it's so weird. Our eyes see better. Our visual system is much more attuned and acute, as well as our internal timing system, to blue light. And so, of course, when you have a lot of our old e-readers, when you're watching very expensive TVs, we are used to having these really high definition pictures with bright light on there to help us see. And so some of the times as you bring that type of technology, because most of these technologies that we see from that aspect for entertainment or social media tends to have light associated with it. And so it's more trying to mediate the light aspects of it than necessarily some of the other keys. Although notifications, of course, dealing with social media as a stressor 15 years ago was very different than what we have to mediate as a stressor today. Of course, scrolling and different activation if you read or watch something that's charged. And so a lot of our devices now are starting to get these sleep modes and things like that to try to limit the notification. So trying to change how you are notified can be a good step. Changing the lighting. So if you have a TV in your bedroom, which I do not recommend, but if you happen to have one in there, or you have a bed partner that needs to watch that, try and change the gain on it. So and just the lighting structure, so it's more of this kind of red sepia tone. A lot of our phone devices or things like our tablets and our computers also have that kind of night shift type mode where you can change the color of your device. And
do not disturb mode.
Yeah.
But alternatively, sometimes you just want to watch Reacher and have Alan Richardson, and hold you while you go to sleep.
That's true. That's true.
Well, these are things we were very much aware of because I was a helicopter pilot in the Army.
Oh, okay.
So, light sensitivity and preparations for night flying and ops was a big deal. But it was also the first time that I heard the word circadian rhythm. And that's fun to say.
Yeah.
What is that? And how does that apply, to me being an aviator and being able to be at my optimal performance, because we're constantly shifting our schedules to be able to fly, disrupting, our sleep sequence, or we always get made fun of because of, the downtime that we had to have and the rest before we went and got into the aircraft, because you don't want a tired Apache pilot shooting missiles downrange. So I'm interested to hear about your thoughts and kind of maybe even the questions that you're asking, or maybe some insights about circadian rhythm. What does the research say about how these disruptions impact the body over time, especially for, folks like us that are having to beat our rhythms up all the time?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we have these two kind of primary systems that work together. So we have that internal timing system, which is interesting. A lot of times I make that akin to if you had like a watch that you're wearing or you're using your phone. I always ask the question, like, if you didn't have your phone or watch, how many of you would get to work on time or do what you need to? And most of the time it's not. So that internal timing system is really a way for us to predict our environment. So help us have physiological signals to help us signal sleep, how to signal us to be awake. And that complements kind of what we consider the other primary system, our sleep need or our sleep drive. So how long you've been awake, you're kind of getting a lot of metabolic waste and things like that over time, which contributes to this sleep need. And so we tend to be able to really kind of feel these things in terms of like our sleep need, but sometimes it's harder to decouple how these two systems work in harmony together until we start working. Of course, like when we look at our service members who have round the clock operations, or we have folks that are even doing something like transmeridian travel, and then we hear about this decoupling, but we call it jet lag. And so our circadian system, of course, is really designed as this kind of, it's an approximate 24-hour, so circa around DN day, that's approximate 24 cycle that's really built into our genes. But as it is intended to be a predictor of your environment, it's also exceptionally adaptable, because it wants to be able to be there to help you predict and anticipate, like, should I be eating now? Yes. All right. I'm going to start having signaling cues so that I can eat my food, digest that more quickly. Is it getting time to go to sleep? I start secreting my endogenous or internal melatonin to help facilitate that kind of tiredness and transition into sleep at night. But when we do transmeridian travel, because that circadian system can really only adapt to about 1 hour time change a day, is that when that decouples, either for, say, shift workers or transmeridian travel, then we have these cues that are signaling our body that aren't as efficient. And then if you have rotating schedules on top of that, we tend to see like, okay, well, my body isn't predicting that I should be eating at 3 a.m. in the morning, but I'm on a 24-hour operation and I'm starving. And we found in some of our research studies in the sleep community, of course, that when doing that, one, your body's like, ooh, like I'm in a high stress environment, obviously, because I'm up for 24 hours. I need really fast digestible sugar. So I really want that bag of Cheetos or something that I can just digest easily. But then we don't necessarily have the physiological processes that might be catching up to actually efficiently like break down those foods so that you can get the energy from it. It's like, oh, I'm going to store that for you as fat. And then we see a lot of our shift workers then that start leading to having these kind of pre-diabetic profiles. They're more inclined to have cardiovascular risk and things like that. And so I think when you talk about how do you help folks who've kind of been dysregulated, is really trying to start, because of how plastic and how much that circadian system wants to adapt, wants to predict, is to start giving cues. And really the biggest cue for that system is light, either the presence or absence thereof. So in the morning, walking outside, getting a big dose of that bright morning sunshine. And then, of course, as your external environment, as you're getting closer to sunset, also having your internal environment. So in your house, if it's getting dark outside, this is a great plan for you to start saying, oh, hey, instead of having my bright kitchen lights on, maybe I should be using a lamp. And so that you can also start mimicking that. And then that internal timing system for your circadian system can help have that natural rise in your melatonin to try and help more easily with the transition to sleep. Of course, again, different recommendations. If you're traveling, you can do so more acutely to try and be like shifting that system earlier or later. Sometimes if someone won't have enough time to appropriately mitigate the jet lag just through natural transition, sometimes it's not best to shift if you're only going to be there for 24 hours or a day. So
I love LAMP.
Lamps.
Well, I think that's such great insight, and I think what it says to me is that our rhythms are like, it wants to get into its natural kind of correspondence, and we have these things that take us out of it and take it away. But just by being aware, and recognizing that there's some things that we can do to mitigate it. So if we have to go to that shift work, or we have to take a big jump, just recognize that it's going to affect you, but with a little preventative, you can minimize the impact to your sleep.
Absolutely.
Well, Doc, we really appreciate your insights. And for all you alphas out there, Doc, where can they find some of this information? Where should they go?
Yeah, so on our Walter Reed Army Institute of Research homepage, we actually have a resources page, which I can send the link. It's probably very, very long for me to actually say out loud, but happy to provide that. And it has, especially for our folks who are active duty right now, and even not, it actually translates to everyone. But it's especially a lot of our resources are focused on folks who are undergoing stressful situations, which I'm aware that could be more than just our service members at this moment in time. As well, engaging in jet travel, how to appropriately use caffeine. A lot of times when people say, "Oh, melatonin is not for me," my knee-jerk response is like, "You might not be using it right." There's how to use melatonin on there, how to mitigate jet lag. And so there's also just some sleep leadership trainings that we try in order to use to kind of train our folks earlier on how to kind of talk about sleep, how to mitigate the impacts of fatigue if you can't avoid sleep loss, which again can be quite frequent. But then when you have control of your sleep, which Joe, I appreciate your words. So when you have control, what can you do to ensure that the sleep that you're getting is higher quality and more restorative for you? Or even how to do something like sleep banked to try to help if you know you're going to be going on a series of time where you're not going to get as much sleep as you want, or if even you might be anticipating a stressful event where you might not get the sleep that you want. How can you do some tactics to improve the sleep leading up to that, to try and be a little bit more protective so that you're not as fatigued while you're engaging in the activity?
I personally just want to be ready when they add it to the Olympics. Competitive sleeping is something that I feel like I could be very strong.
You've been training
at.
your whole life.
That
one, Joe.
I spend at least 6 hours a day training.
Olympian alphas. We're gonna have
that medal for there. It's like I feel like I could win.
We're going to have that website in our show notes along with the social media handles. So be sure to check that out. Doc, it's been such a wonderful experience chatting with you, and look forward to digging a little deeper into all those resources.
Yeah, Dr. Burke, thank you so much for joining us for the great conversation. I feel ready for my sleep study tonight. Alphas, stick around for some scuttlebutt after the break.
The American Legion is raising awareness about PTSD and veteran suicide by offering hope, camaraderie, and support.
Be the one to help end veteran suicide.
Be the one to save one veteran.
Be the one to ask a veteran in your life how they're doing.
Be the one to reach out when a veteran is struggling.
Go to betheone.org and help the American Legion end veteran suicide.
Will you be the one?
Wake up! I hope you had a good nap. We're back for some scuttlebutt. Joe,
Anna Coleman Ladd. Anna Coleman Ladd, born in Philadelphia in 1878, was a well-known sculptor in the city of Boston by the outbreak of World War I. During the war, Ladd worked with the Red Cross, eventually incorporating her artistic talents when she founded the studio for portrait masks in Paris. Paris, as they say. Paris. Ladd and her team created prosthetic masks for soldiers whose faces were disfigured in combat. See, now it's less funny. But they took cast of soldiers' faces and produced masks from the thin sheets of galvanized copper. Ladd painstakingly painted the metal form while the soldier was wearing it so she could perfectly match skin tones, and she used real hair to create the eyebrows, eyelashes, and mustaches. Each mask took about 1 month to produce. The completed masks were often held on by spectacles. And we're going to have a link with some of the pictures of these incredible masks. It sounds like there's a lot of love and work, and the heart behind doing something like that is really incredible. But when she returned from France, Ladd continued to champion the plight of the disfigured World War I veteran. She gave lectures and showed slides of the work performed at the studio in Paris. Her sculptural work also reflected her new perspective, moving away from playful sprites and elegant noblewomen and instead featuring figures torn by war. During this era, she created 2 monuments for the American Legion. So on Memorial Day in 1924, the American Legion in Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts, unveiled a memorial to 5 young men of their community who lost their lives during World War I. Unlike other world memorials from this era, this one embraced the horrors of war. Facing west is night, which shows a corpse-like figure caught in barbed wire. Facing east of the rising sun is dawn, which depicts 2 men rising from the battlefield. And the men, like the poppies of Flanders Field, sprung forth from the battle-scarred earth. When Anna Coleman Ladd presented her design to the American Legion, it was highly controversial, as you can imagine, and made front-page headlines in Boston and New York. But, like, that's art, right? That's good art. You just got people talking about it. It had the right heart behind it, the spirit behind it. It wasn't done, mean. That's really incredible. And she had seen the horrors of war up close. She'd seen these injured military and wanted a memorial that illustrated them for what they truly were. And Manchester by the Sea American Legion Post agreed. Good on them. That's something that I think that if you're going to take a stand, if people can't stand to look at something that represents what people actually go through, then that says more about the people who are offended than the people who agree, So another memorial, this one commissioned by the Beverly Farms, Massachusetts American Legion, reflected the artist's view of the price paid by those who serve. The sculpture, Cost of Victory, shows victory as a mournful winged figure staring off in the distance as a naked young man dies at his feet, gazing pleadingly upward toward victory. So when victory's been bought, at such a cost of anguish, exhaustion, insomnia, ugliness, and horror, it is hardly the time for the placid waving of laurel crowns as in more sentimental days. The victors can sit back no longer. They are bound by that sacrifice of boys to live up to their ideal of a new world, to make good their hopes to remember, Ladd stated at the dedication of the Beverly Memorial. And what beautiful words. Anybody, there are ways to, the art is such a beautiful form. And it's funny because, you deploy with these young men and women and you don't realize how many musicians and dancers and artists and photographers and sculptors are in there. Even young kids who grew up doing one thing. I mean, every one of us has probably seen a mural on a wall that was just drawn by pencil by some random 19-year-old kid. And you're like, what are you doing? I wish there was a world where you could afford to do this for the rest of your life instead of being here with us. But, there's beauty. And maybe like her, there's an inspiration there that maybe that's what it takes for some people to really unlock that side of them.
I think, as somebody who took the complications of how to deal with emotions post-combat and channel that through the therapy of art, I could see how Ladd could do that in a positive way too, and in using that to help others. I am very familiar with her work. My great-grandfather was a World War I veteran. And so many, granted, he was one of the oldest living World War I veterans left. So there weren't a lot of veterans around that had, people who were, using prosthetics like those that Ladd provided for soldiers. But anyway, she was an artisan and a distinctive woman in history, and it being Women's History Month, obviously highlighting somebody like Ladd is definitely honorable. And for all the women who stepped up, like her artists and the like, definitely amazing.
Heavily recommend you step into the show notes here and check out some of this stuff, because it's really incredible.
What about the controversy in 1924 with the Manchester by the Sea? I've literally not been able to stop thinking about that and trying to think, how do I actually feel about that? Because on one hand, I'm like, it's so heavy with what is endured in combat. And then, I'm thinking, should you memorialize it in that way? Because we know that those things happen. And do we really want that, like, in our town? I'm sure like that was the conversation of the day, like, the grotesque rawness, of it. But then that's the reminder of what is endured and over there. And what if not, but to spark conversation to be able to make that. So it's really interesting. Because
I can see both sides, especially in retrospect. I think for me, going from being somebody who had to, I wore a blanket over my leg when I had the pins and everything that was holding my leg together. And that was a conversation that somebody had with me that sort of helped me sort of cope through that, which was, if you can live through it, they can afford to see it. But it's important to keep in context who they is, and in that case, it's important for people, for context, and for me not to feel like I was isolated when I did feel isolated. And then the newer version of that for me is walking into these offices with a prosthetic leg in DC and letting them see that your decisions have a weight that you don't always see. You get an opportunity to sort of face that. And I think for the right people, that can be a good thing. But I agree. I see your point, definitely.
Well, it's great points. And yeah, like you said, I was clicking through and looking at some of the facial prosthetics that she came up with. And so definitely jump in there and take a look. But hey, let's go a little bit lighter with this next one. Dr. Tina Burke talked to us about how important sleep is when it comes to good health and wellness. But VA also wants us to know that laughter is, in fact, the best medicine.
Reader's Digest was right.
Deep in the bowels of the VA website, within their whole health library, we've unearthed a tool focused on the healing benefits of humor and laughter. The tool cites the benefits of humor and helps caregivers create personal health plans that include humor to lighten spirits and help the healing process. Throughout the tool, they even throw in a few dad jokes to spice things up. Joe, I know you got one at the queue, but you'll have to wait for this one. A patient walks into a clinic terribly anxious. Patient: nurse, please help me. I'm shrinking. I'm losing an inch of height every few minutes. The nurse responds, sorry, the team is on the way to an emergency. You're just going to have to be a little patient.
Oh,
wow.
Super producer Holly's losing it. According to this document, studies have shown that laughter has measurable physiological effects, changes body chemistry and brain function. Laughter has physiological effects. It changes body chemistry and brain function through increasing heart and respiratory rates, as well as oxygen consumption over a short period. While these effects may not be equivalent to aerobic exercise, 10 to 15 minutes of laughter per day may burn 10 to 40 extra calories. Laughter affects heart function. It increases stroke volume and cardiac output and dilates blood vessels. Intense laughter can affect muscle tone. Laughter lowers levels of stress hormone, cortisol. It increases serum immunoglobulins A and E. Almost nailed that.
It's my third favorite kind of goblin.
Immunoglobulins. Different than the immunoglobulins hiding out under. No. It raises level of beta endorphins, the feel-good chemicals of the body, and increases human growth hormone. I know when I was
Who's saying intense laughter can affect muscle tone? I'm thinking that's why I'm so damn fit.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's funny because there were times that my mom would kind of, when we were kids, she would like, she knew that laughing was therapeutic, and she would just like make us laugh. And at first it's like, oh, I don't want to do it. And then you do it. And then all of a sudden, like, you're laughing uncontrollably and can't stop. And it's cool. Like, you can totally, you know, get into it, like, if you want to. Or what's more special is when you just have the offshoot hilarious comment that just like sends you railing, which happens from time to time on this show.
At least once every episode.
So the document goes on to cite studies that illustrate how laughter can affect specific conditions and offer resources in suggested activities. So are you guys ready for a little practical application learning lab?
Let's do this.
Because I'd like to try one of them with you two and our alphas right now. All right, let's do a little laughter yoga. Laughter yoga practitioners contend that you do not have to feel the urge to laugh in order to derive the benefits of laughter. In fact, participants often begin by pretending to laugh, and typically real laughter follows. Oh my gosh, this is what I just said. So let's give it a try. Say the words Mississippi, Tennessee.
Mississippi, Tennessee.
MISSISSIPP.
Great. Now laugh with the same cadence you used to say those words. Ha ha ho ho,
ho,
he he he.
He.
Repeat this 10 times. Ha ha ho ho, he he. Ha ha ho ho, he he.
We didn't get through that, and that's okay.
Okay. It was a little forced, but it was a little real.
That's actually. Oh my gosh!
What's the most awkward place that you just couldn't keep it together? Have you ever just got an like wild attack?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You do?
My husband took me to this really nice restaurant early on in our marriage. And he and I, we just have this really great appreciation for laughter. And we've never been one to hold each other back, no matter how stuffy the situation or inappropriate. And so we're in this fancy restaurant, and his everybody else is around us is like snooty Snoodsville, and he just leaned back in his chair and he goes, ha! Just this forceful, like, inappropriate, guttural, one belted laugh, and from there it sparked just a back and forth laughter that was so contagious between the two of us, and we laughed so much we cried, and it was great. That's why I love him. And
so if you were in love, that would have done it. That would have been the moment.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I had one last year that was unlike anything that I've ever experienced, and I wasn't involved in it, but I witnessed it. I was at a Joe Dispenza week-long meditation retreat. You meditate 35 hours over the course of the week that you're there. In one of the meditations, somebody started laughing, and it, like, you know, there's like hour long where the lights are down and everything. There's 2,500 people on the floor, and it spread to the next person, and it was like this laugh virus that then permeated through the whole thing and caught like everybody in there. And they like had to end the meditation because it got so out of control. And I was like, what happened? And they're like, you know, they had like a standard term for it. Like, oh, case of the giggles got away. And I was like, oh, this happens. They're like, oh yeah, at least one meditation, like every week long. But it was a wild thing because it was like 2,000 people just losing it.
When they found out that we went into a surgery, my wife has inappropriate laughter, like it's a coping mechanism for her. So this wasn't my story, but it's a story that my wife tells all the time because everybody looked at her like she was crazy. But they came out and they told her that the surgery, we're having trouble getting blood flow to his foot and we may have to take the other foot. My wife busts out laughing. inappropriately, because it's just one of those crazy moments, you know. And apparently everybody stared at her like she was insane, you know. But that's just, I mean, honestly, for us, the worse things get, the funnier it is. If I'm changing a tire on the side of the road and it's a dangerous situation, and like I'm tired and I'm hungry and I realize I left my phone's dead, and then it starts raining, the rain is funny. That's when it's funny. Like, all this other stuff is really bad and I'm stressed out, but the rain just makes it funny.
Just one more thing.
Just one more thing. That's it. So I'm here for it.
Well, make sure you laugh a lot, guys.
Ho ho, he.
Do it all. Well, Alphas, back to that National Debunking Day. It's that time. Have you ever heard of a story or a news, or just thought, who comes up with these things? Well, so have we, which is why we've never been happier that Debunking Day exists, to get rid of those insubstantial myths. We live in an information-based world where thousands of new facts surface every day. It's no surprise that truth often goes missing when some of the facts are passed from person to person. You know what I'm talking about. Like when Aunt Betty just says, well, I saw it on Google, or I saw it on the internet. It's got to be real. Debunkers exist to challenge false information and provide more clarity to the world. A debunker is a person who discredits false or suspicious claims. These claims are sometimes controversial, like, hey, Holly, our super producer, UFO sightings and conspiracy theories, or can be seemingly smaller, like sea salt is healthier than table salt. Whatever the case may be, debunkers help us expose and put a stop to the spread of false information. One of such debunkers is the creator of the holiday itself, Rob Brenzy. Brenzy is an astrologer, author, musician, and part-time debunker. He writes a weekly horoscope column. If you're into horoscopes, try it out. Free Will Astrology. That has been published since 1980. From 1970s to 1990s, he was a singer and songwriter that took several rock bands from Santa Cruz area to California and eventually America as a whole. He is also the founder of Beauty and Truth Lab, the author of several books and a memoir, The Efficient of Hundreds of Weddings, and in 2001, Burning Man. And he even ran for city council in Santa Cruz. Hey, all you guys in Santa Cruz, you're lucky as hell.
Living it
now,
up.
One of the great things about debunking is it's entertaining and it's got great value in the entertainment industry. And here are just a few shows that you might want to check out. Adam Ruins Everything, Mythbusters, Urban Legends, Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction. Fellas, do you guys have a favorite show?
I really liked Mythbusters for a long time. I watched that. I think I've seen most of those episodes.
Yeah. Adam?
Yeah, same.
Same?
I think I've seen a couple of the Adam Ruins Everything, but no, I really enjoyed Mythbusters for like 5 hours on a Saturday.
You get stuck. When that one's on, you're like, you're watching it.
Well, I think what's great about Mythbusters is it rolls in science, but Adam does as well. He'll bring in scientists and subject matter experts.
And Adam does ruin everything.
He does. Yeah, he does really crush your spirits. But I do know that there are other shows out there that will either uphold or disprove what you want to believe. And there are podcasts. Super producer Holly's typing in her own personal loves right now. She's saying Laura Krant podcast called Wild Thing. That's probably a Sasquatch or Bigfoot podcast. So if you're a Sasquatcher, check out Laura Krantz's Wild Thing.
I'm a little sassy.
Alphas, I really want to know what you're into. So drop me a line and tell me what you're into for debunking, or maybe you've got something that you want to uphold, or like anyway, tell me about it. Send me some notes.
While we squatch around, we're gonna squatch around over here while you do that.
All right, Alphas, thanks for listening. You can subscribe to our podcast, our newsletter, send us emails about all your debunking endeavors and guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. We'll see you next week.